Welcome back, everybody. We've been diving into how cryptocurrency, government, and economic freedom all kind of intersect.
Yeah,
And today, I think we've got a story that really gets to the heart of all that.
absolutely.
We're going to be looking at an article from Cointelegraph.
Okay.
It's called, and get this, Doge could increase economic freedom in U.S. Coinbase CEO.
Wow.
Now, that title, I know it sounds a little wild, but the connections it makes, I mean,
Yeah, it's pretty interesting.
really gets you thinking,
It really does. It shows how these seemingly totally random things, like you have this meme-based cryptocurrency, then a whole new government agency, and then the CEO of like a major crypto exchange.
Right.
They all come together, and it makes you ask some pretty big questions about where our economy is going.
Exactly. And the story really all starts with this new U.S. Department of Government Efficiency,
Okay.
or DOGE for short.
DOGE, yeah, that brings up Dogecoin right away.
Of course. I mean, how could it not?
That cryptocurrency, it started as a joke, but it's gotten a lot of attention.
Right.
And Elon Musk, I mean, he's been a big part of that.
For sure.
But here's the thing. Elon Musk with Vivek Ramaswamy, they're actually going to be the ones running this new DOGE department. And get this, it's under President-elect Donald Trump.
It's really interesting, Trump, he keeps bringing these business leaders into government.
Yeah.
So, what do you think this means for how the department will actually work, especially with them saying they want to reduce government spending and cut back on regulations?
Well, I think that's the big question, isn't it? I mean, when governments try to streamline things, the results, well, they've been kind of mixed in the past.
Yeah.
Some people say that less government means things run better and the economy grows. But then there's others who are worried about what happens to, like, social programs and safety nets when you cut back.
Right, right.
So it's going to be fascinating to see how this administration handles that, finding that balance.
Yeah, for sure. And how much of this is really new? I mean, haven't we heard all this about reforming government before?
Oh, absolutely. Politicians have been promising to shrink the government forever, it seems like.
Exactly.
I think what really matters is, can this DOGE department actually make real changes, or is it all just for show?
I see. So we need to see what they specifically plan to do, how they deal with things like, reforming regulations.
Right. Those details will tell us a lot.
Okay, so now let's get to Brian Armstrong. He's the CEO of Coinbase.
Coinbase, yeah.
And he's actually pretty on board with this whole DOGE department thing. He thinks it could be a good thing for economic freedom in the U.S.
That's really interesting, especially considering where he comes from, the cryptocurrency world.
Right. I mean, Coinbase is one of the biggest cryptocurrency exchanges out there.
Huge.
So when he gets behind a government initiative like this, people notice.
They do. And what really stands out to me is his idea about, get this, a constitutional amendment to put a limit on government spending.
Whoa.
He wants to cap it at 10% of GDP.
Wow, that's a pretty big idea, right? Like writing being fiscally conservative right into the Constitution.
It's definitely a big idea, and it shows how some people feel, especially in the tech world and among libertarians.
Mm-hmm.
They think the government's spending way too much and it can't go on like this.
Yeah.
But a cap like that, well, it would definitely face a lot of pushback.
Of course.
It brings up all sorts of questions about, what could happen if we do this? Like, what would it mean for things like healthcare and education? Those are essential services.
Yeah.
And how would it work if the economy changes? There's a lot to consider.
He also talks about this idea of a U.S. sovereign wealth fund where every citizen would have a share and get dividends if there's a budget surplus.
Interesting.
It sounds kind of like a universal basic income, but it's tied to how well the country's doing economically.
Yeah, that concept's been gaining some traction. The idea is you give everyone a stake in the country's success, and that should, in theory, encourage everyone to be more responsible with, the budget and stuff.
Yeah, but how realistic is that, really? I mean, look at where the U.S. economy is right now, the national debt and all that.
Yeah, that's a really important point. Sovereign wealth funds are usually something you see in countries that have tons of extra money from natural resources, like, Norway with all its oil.
Right.
The U.S., well, it's not quite like that.
Not really, no.
So for Armstrong's idea to work, things would have to change a lot. Like, we'd need to see big budget surpluses, and that would mean getting serious about being fiscally responsible and, well, maybe making some tough choices about what we spend money on.
And even if they did set up a fund like that, wouldn't it be super hard to manage it and make sure everyone gets their dividends fairly?
Absolutely. It brings up all these questions about who runs it, how they invest the money, and how to keep politics from messing it all up. It's complicated.
So just to recap, we've got this new government agency all about efficiency. this tech CEO pushing for big economic changes, and then there's Dogecoin, which started as a joke, but now it's like a symbol for this whole debate about economic freedom and individual liberty.
And that's what I find really interesting, how this meme, this Dogecoin thing, it taps into something deeper and becomes this, like, focal point for all this discussion and debate.
Yeah, it's fascinating. But before we get too deep into that, let's talk about how all this news, this new DOGE department, and the fact that it, kind of reminds everyone of Dogecoin, how has that affected the cryptocurrency market? The article says Dogecoin's price jumped way up after they announced the department. It hit a yearly high of 39.7.
Yeah, it just goes to show how strong speculation is, especially in the cryptocurrency world. It's so volatile. And with Dogecoin, well, they have this whole meme-driven community.
Right.
So just the fact that it was connected to DOGE, even though it's for a totally different reason, it was enough to make people start buying like crazy.
Wow.
And to really understand why that happens, we need to look at how speculation works and how people like Elon Musk can affect cryptocurrency prices.
All right, let's do that. Let's break it all down.
Okay, let's get into it. #TTS, the Deep Dive episode 2024-1207, part 2 of 3.
So we were just talking about how this whole DOGE department thing and the fact that, it reminds people of Dogecoin caused a lot of activity in the crypto market.
Yeah, it's a perfect example of how speculation and, like, the psychology of the market play a huge role in how cryptocurrency prices move, especially for something like Dogecoin, with that big meme community behind it.
So can you explain, like, how that actually happens? How does speculation and, people like Elon Musk, how do they actually affect the price of something like Dogecoin?
Well, with speculation, people are basically trying to guess what the price will do in the future. And they look at all sorts of things, news, what's trending on social media, even who's endorsing it.
Oh, I see.
And with Dogecoin, Elon Musk, he's been a big factor. His tweets, what he says publicly about it,
Yeah.
it's often caused the price to go up or down.
So when this news about the DOGE department came out, people saw that connection to Dogecoin and thought, oh, I better buy now before the price goes even higher.
Exactly. And that's where the psychology part comes in. Because when more people buy into the hype, the price goes up, and then that attracts even more buyers. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
So it just keeps feeding itself.
Right. It's called a pump, and it can be the price jump up really fast.
But isn't that really risky? What happens when people stop being excited about it?
That's the danger of these speculative bubbles, because when the mood changes and people start selling, the price can crash down just as fast as it went up.
Oh, wow.
It's called a dump. And people who bought in when the price was high, they can lose a lot of money.
So was this whole Dogecoin price jump, was that basically market manipulation?
Not necessarily. It's tricky. Some people might say Musk's tweets are manipulation, but he's been accused of that before, and he won those cases.
Interesting.
It's more about his influence. Whether he means to do it or not, it has a big impact on how people feel about the market and how they trade.
This brings us back to Brian Armstrong and his ideas about economic freedom. He seems to be saying that cryptocurrency, maybe even Dogecoin, can help people have more control, against the government having too much power.
Yeah, and that idea, it definitely appeals to some people, the ones who don't trust the government to handle the economy.
Right.
They see cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, which aren't controlled by central banks or the government, as a way to get out of the traditional financial system.
But is that realistic? I mean, can cryptocurrencies really replace the current system, especially for everyday things like buying stuff or making sure your money is safe?
That's still being debated. Cryptocurrencies have some good things about them, like being decentralized and private, but they also have problems, like it's hard to make them work for everyone. The prices go up and down a lot, and no one's sure how they'll be regulated.
Speaking of economic freedom, we haven't really talked about what that actually means, like practically. What are we talking about when we say economic freedom?
That's a great point, because people interpret it in different ways depending on their political and economic views. But in general, it means people can make choices about money without the government interfering too much.
So things like being able to start a business, invest your money, decide how you spend or save it.
Exactly. And it also includes things like having property rights, a fair legal system, and no corruption. There are actually organizations that measure economic freedom in different countries. They look at things like government spending, taxes, regulations, and property rights.
And how does the U.S. usually rank in terms of economic freedom?
The U.S. has usually been high up in the rankings, but it's been slipping lately. Some people say it's because more government regulation and spending, while others point to things like crony capitalism and special interests having too much influence.
So if we go back to what Armstrong is proposing, would capping spending and creating a sovereign wealth fund actually give people more economic freedom?
That's a tough one. There's no easy answer. It all depends on how those policies are put into practice and what trade-offs are made. For example, a spending cap might limit the government's ability to provide things like social safety nets and public services, and some would say that actually restricts economic freedom for people who rely on those programs.
And with a sovereign wealth fund, even though it could have some benefits, it also raises concerns about the government controlling a lot of assets and the possibility of politics influencing investment decisions.
Exactly, and then there's the question of whether such a fund would actually help with wealth inequality in the U.S. Some people think it could make things worse, while others believe it could be a fairer way to share economic gains.
It seems like Armstrong's ideas, while interesting, raise a lot of questions.
They do, and that's what makes this whole discussion so fascinating. It forces us to really think about the role of government in the economy, what economic freedom really means, and how we can come up with new solutions for these complicated problems.
Okay, so we've talked about how speculation works in the crypto market, what economic freedom is all about, and looked at what might happen if Armstrong's ideas were put into practice. What I find really interesting is how this is all happening with this new DOGE department and the fact that it, unintentionally reminds everyone of Dogecoin.
It shows how these random events can come together in unexpected ways, and how something that started as a joke, like Dogecoin, can become a symbol for something much bigger.
So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, what are some key takeaways for our listeners? What should they be thinking about as they explore these issues further?
I think the most important thing to remember is that the relationship between government, technology, and individual liberty is constantly changing.
And that there aren't any easy answers or simple solutions for complex problems like economic freedom and the role of government.
Absolutely, it's a conversation that requires nuance, critical thinking, and being willing to consider different viewpoints.
It's about being open-minded and looking at things from different angles. Okay, well, let's move on to the final part of our deep dive and see where this conversation takes us.
Sounds good. Hashtag TTS, the deep dive episode, 2024-1207, part 3 of 3.
It's wild, right? This
Yeah.
whole thing just shows you how unpredictable things are, especially when you're talking about technology, finance, and politics all mixed together.
Yeah.
I mean, who could have predicted that Dogecoin, of all things, would be part of a serious conversation about, like, economic freedom and the role of government?
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. It really shows how powerful memes and online communities can be,
Yeah.
They can shape how we think about things and even affect what happens in the real world.
Uh,
Dogecoin, even though it started as a joke, it obviously struck a chord with a lot of people, especially the ones who are looking for something different, an alternative to the traditional systems.
yeah.
The ones that feel like they have all the power and control.
And it's interesting to see how this all ties in with Elon Musk being involved. I mean, he's been a big Dogecoin fan from the start. And now he's running a government agency that just happens to have the same acronym, even if it's just a coincidence.
It's kind of a funny coincidence, isn't it?
It really is. It's like a meme coming to life.
It really is. And Musk, he's always been kind of a disruptor, He challenges the way things are done, pushes the boundaries of what's possible.
Yeah.
And now he's in a position where he could actually disrupt the government from the inside.
Do you think he can actually make real changes in the government, or will all the bureaucracy and politics in Washington just hold him back?
That's the big question, isn't it?
It is.
Washington's not exactly known for being open to change, and Musk's way of doing things, well, it's definitely unconventional, so he'll probably face some pushback from people who like things the way they are.
Right. But then again, he's been incredibly successful in the private sector.
He has.
And he's really good at getting people excited about his ideas.
That's true.
So maybe that will give him some leverage to, shake things up a bit.
Maybe so. It'll be interesting to see how it all plays out.
And what about Brian Armstrong and his ideas about using technology to promote economic freedom? Do you think his proposals will gain any traction, or are they just too radical for most people to accept?
I think it'll probably be a mix. Some people will support it, some will oppose it.
Makes sense.
There are definitely more and more people who are unhappy with the way things are, both politically and economically.
Yeah, I can see that.
And they're open to trying new things, especially if it involves using technology to give individuals more power.
But then there are others who are going to be more hesitant, right? The ones who are worried about the risks and the unintended consequences of making such big changes.
Exactly. They might think Armstrong's ideas are too idealistic, or even dangerous.
Right. And finding a way to balance those different perspectives, to find some common ground, that's going to be crucial if we want to see any real progress.
Absolutely. It's about finding a way forward that addresses everyone's concerns.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one thing you want our listeners to take away from all of this?
I think the most important thing is to realize that we're living in a time of incredible change. Things are being disrupted in ways we've never seen before.
Yeah.
The lines between technology, finance, politics, even humor, they're all blurring. The old rules just don't apply anymore. It's a time full of opportunity, but also potential danger.
So, how should our listeners navigate this new landscape? What should they be paying attention to? What questions should they be asking?
Stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged. That's what I would say.
I like that.
Don't be afraid to challenge assumptions, to question authority, to really think critically about the information you come across. The future is being shaped right now, and we all have a role to play in making sure it's a future that benefits everyone.
That's a great message. Stay curious, stay informed, stay engaged, words to live by. And on that note, I think we'll wrap up this deep dive into the world of Dogecoin, government efficiency, and economic freedom. It's been quite a journey, and who knows what the future holds.
It's definitely unpredictable.
It is, but one thing's for sure, it's going to be interesting. Thanks for joining us, everyone.